In this video, I'll show you how to create a simple reflected ceiling plan for a commercial design project. We will start off by downloading from our online course, Assignment 7A. And this is just showing two different individual office spaces. When adding a ceiling, you want to make sure that you're on the ceiling level. So you would go to Ceiling Plans and then click on Level 1. You add the ceiling under Architecture, so you would click Architecture and Ceiling, and it brings up the Modify Ceiling menu. We're going to change the height of our ceiling to 9 feet 4 inches. You always want to make sure that the ceiling's height is below the next level's height, or the added ceiling will not be visible in the reflected ceiling plan. We'll use the Sketch Ceiling tool first. And this is where you draw around the interior of the room, creating a boundary line for the ceiling. So I'll go to Architecture Ceiling, and then in the Modify tools, I'll make sure I have boundary line selected, and then I'm going to use the Line tool. I'm going to make sure I'm snapping to the endpoints. Sometimes you have to zoom in a little bit. You want to make sure that you close your boundary or it won't read where the ceiling needs to go because it has an open boundary. After you're done drawing your boundary line, just hit the check mark and your ceiling will be placed in the room, and it's also perfectly centered. An easier way to add a ceiling to this room could be using the rectangle tool. So I'm going to undo this, undo my boundary line. And then I would go to Architecture and Ceiling, Sketch Ceiling, and then you see you can use any of these shapes here to add the ceiling boundary line. So I'm going to click on the rectangle, and then I'll go from corner to corner, and then hit my check mark. And there, the same type of ceiling is placed. So that might be a little bit quicker. An even easier way to add a ceiling is to use the Automatic Ceiling tool right here. So if you click on Automatic Ceiling, it automatically reads the boundaries as the wall, and then you just click within there. So this is a really easy way to quickly add ceilings on your floor plan, especially if you have multiple rooms. You can also modify the grid. So you see how we have these really thin areas over here? That wouldn't be ideal for installation just because it's really hard to install a really thin piece of ceiling right here. So I may decide to, when I show my reflected ceiling plan, to move the grid over a bit. So you move grid lines just like you move everything in Revit. You first select your modify arrow, select the line, and then it will pull up the Modify Ceilings options. And then you click Move. And then let's say I wanted to move this whole grid over 12 inches or 1 foot. Just type that in. And you can see how it adjusts. It did an automatic adjustment to the ceiling grid so I don't have those weird spaces or very thin spaces on either side. This is a standard ceiling grid, so there would never be a situation where you just move one line. That wouldn't make sense to do that because then it would throw off the entire grid system. So you notice when I moved that one line over, it adjusted the entire grid. So let's do the same for this one over here. So again, I would click my Modify arrow, select the line or one of the lines, and then move it over 1 foot by typing in 1 foot. You could also rotate an entire grid so that it is going in a certain direction, so maybe a 45-degree direction. So I would do that first by going to the Modify arrow, selecting a horizontal line, and then you see it brings up the Modify commands, and I would hit the Rotate tool. Then I would type in the direction that I want it to go. You can see how it's kind of snapping to some standard directions. So you could just hit 45 here. And you can see it put my entire grid on a 45-degree angle. So you can change the ceiling type of a room to one of the 3 standard ceilings that are listed here. So what you would do is click your Modify arrow, select one element of the ceiling or one line. You could change it to a 2x4 grid, or you could change it to gypsum board on metal stud, which would just be a drywall ceiling. Drywall ceilings are sometimes hard to select, so I'm going to show you how to use the filter tool. So on this ceiling, you see I can just select a line, but with the drywall ceiling, it's hard to do that. So sometimes what you could do is come over and just window around one area and then go to the filter tool, which automatically comes up when you're in the modify command and you've selected something. And then you can uncheck what you want, what you don't want selected. So all we want is the ceiling. So I'm going to uncheck the curtain panels, curtain wall glass, the curtain wall mullions, windows, and walls, and then hit OK. And you can see that I just have my ceiling selected now. And then I can switch back to that 2x2 acoustical ceiling system. So that ends this video on adding ceilings and editing ceiling types. Some manufacturers, like Armstrong Commercial Ceilings, will sometimes offer Revit files or families that you can bring into your drawing to add their actual ceiling type into your drawing. That could be very helpful when you do 3D renderings later. So always, if you're looking for a specific ceiling type and it's not within these standard ceiling types within Revit, look to the manufacturer and they may have a Revit file that you can download.